team here at Perry Johnson Registrar's Food Safety Inc. I'll be helping to facilitate today's session, We're very excited to be welcoming back Jennifer Crandall of the Safe Food en Route for another webinar, and I'll be introducing her to you all a little bit further into the presentation. Before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping notes I wanted to take care of. To ensure audio quality, all attendees on the call are on mute. However, we do absolutely want to take all of your questions. So please use the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel to type your questions in, and we will respond to as many of them as possible at the conclusion of the prepared slides. The number one question we usually get is, will the slides be available for download? Is there going to be a recording? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. The slides will be available for download from PJRFSI.com, and a recording will be able to be viewed on our YouTube channel, usually within 24 to 48 hours of the webinar completion. So this is just a quick view of what the control panel might look like, where to click to submit your questions. You'll just open up that little drop-down menu, type your question in, and click send, and we will get to as many of those with answers as possible. Just to get us started, before we introduce our first speaker, I wanted to launch a quick polling question at you guys just to get to know who's in the audience today. All your responses to polling questions in this webinar are anonymous, so don't worry about anyone seeing how you responded. And that first question is your organization currently certified to a GFSI standard? The options include, yes, we're certified with PJRFSI, yes, we're certified with another certification body, maybe you're not yet certified, but you'd like to be, or maybe you're just curious about certification and you're not yet looking to becoming certified. So get those answers in and we'll rattle right along as soon as we get some more participation. Again, for those of us just joining us, the slides will be available for download from PJRFSI.com, and any questions you have throughout the webinar can be submitted in the questions tab. Don't feel like you have to wait till the end to get those questions in, so go ahead and write them in as you think of them. All right, we're gonna go ahead and close the poll for now. And it looks like everyone who's in the webinar so far is certified, who's responded, so that's always great to hear. All right. And first I want to introduce you to Paul Demarin. He's our Senior Vice President of Food Safety and Supply Chain here at PJRFSI. He joined us back in January of this year and has over 35 years of experience in the hospitality, service, and retail agri-food sectors. Before he came to PJRFSI, Paul worked for 15 years in the certification industry with clients in sectors from food safety and supply chain to brand protection and quality. Paul has worked for many years in management systems certification as well. And before that, Paul was a professional chef and a consultant for over 20 years in major hotel chains, restaurants, private golf courses, and food service organizations. So I'm going to hand things over to Paul, and Paul, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar today. We really appreciate your time. Before I pass the reins over to Jen, I'm just going to give a very short overview of our organization. As Amy mentioned, my name is Paul. I'm the SVP here at Perry Johnson Food Safety. And I also have the pleasure of welcoming my colleague, Jennifer Crandall from Safe Food en Route, who's going to be talking to us a little bit further today about food safety versus branding and some of the decisions that go along with that. This is just our agenda. Let's just pass right through there. So to kind of jump right in, if you take a look at Perry Johnson Registrars as a whole, we're part of a family of companies that was founded by Perry Johnson himself back in 1994. We've been part of the international certification and registration industry from the very beginning. As you can see, we expanded well over the years internationally, all over the world. In fact, Japan, China, Germany, all over Europe, as well as Latin America, and certainly in Canada and the US. We've achieved many accreditations during that time as well, like ANAB and UCAS, to name a few. In 2005, PJNA was founded, and that's a healthcare technology company that specializes in telemedicine, virtual scribing, and transcription. In 2012 is when PJRFSI was founded, and that was really as a demand for third-party certification and auditing in the industry. We know about 10 years ago, the big boom for GFSI happened. So we're headquartered in Troy, Michigan, but we're really a global company. We have organizations and auditors around the world in about 60 different countries. We have offices in about 20, and we do everything from third-party certification like GFSI to other industry standards such as social responsibility, gluten-free, cannabis, hemp, and several of the government FDA audits, things like that. So to take a look at who we work with in the industry, we typically work with all types of companies across the supply chain. So everybody from distribution to importers and exporters, manufacturers, farms, processors, and we work with them to try and help them mitigate and manage the risk within their business and their supply chain, and help their quality initiatives as well as protecting their brand. We've worked with many different customers across all areas of the business. And as Perry Johnson himself did about 30 years ago, we apply the principles of quality management and collaboration in all of our audit field and office activities. And we follow, standards that are recognized by international governance groups and accreditation bodies like SQF, BRC, ANAB, and UCAS, as I mentioned earlier. So we have currently about 460 assessors across those 60 countries who understand not only the rules and regulations of those countries, but equally important, the culture. And we also take our customers very seriously, and we want to make sure that every customer that we work with feels like they're being looked after and their concerns are being met and hopefully exceeded. So just quickly here on the certification space, it continues to be deemed a essential service. That is really because the certification industry is based on the results of tests and inspections and audits, and that gives confidence to you and me as the consumer that an organization's products or services are being thoroughly evaluated against various international standards. In today's market, the landscape is continually changing. It's a very dynamic place. Trends are shifting regularly. Expectations are changing in an instant, certainly because of COVID. But there's everything happening still today. Recalls, different regulations being implemented on a regular basis. And navigating that landscape is sometimes challenging for any organization, regardless of size or scope. So because of that, and I'll just move on here, we really have about 30 different programs that we currently support in the food space. Looking at this slide here, you'll see there's many types of audits. There's accredited audits, unaccredited. Some are client specific, some are government regulated, some are retailer mandated. When you look at our company, we kind of define our services into 5 different areas. First party audits are if we're working with a company that owns an audit checklist or a protocol, they've written it, they've developed it, but we audit to it, usually because of, we have auditors all over the world and we can demonstrate significant cost savings, but also because our auditors are qualified, they've been vetted, they're continually trained and calibrated. That's usually another reason that customers will utilize us or outsource that to a third party like Perry Johnson Food Safety. We also do second party audits. These are very similar to first party, but it's we, the certification body, that own these schemes and standards and have written them. And then of course, all of our third party standards. So we also, recognized by the government to conduct various audits and inspections like FSMA for the Food Safety Modernization Act, the FSBP standards for foreign supplier verification, and the VQIP program for voluntary qualified importer program. Now, looking at this just very quickly here, if you think about it, these standards have been in place for 30 to 40 years, quite a bit longer than the food space. And really, we were at as I mentioned, the forefront of certification from the very beginning. So standards like quality and environmental and information security, these have been around for many, many years. And we're happy to report that on the Perry Johnson Registrar's side of the house, we can support our clients in really more of a one-stop shop. So if you take a look at some of the accreditations that we hold globally, this is just a small sample of some of the ones that were recognized around the world. Again, the accreditation gives customers assurance that our family of companies operates under the accreditation rules, which helps us to maintain our quality of work. So we do many different complimentary webinars like we're doing today with Jen, but with other industry groups to really make sure that we're giving our customers the information that they need to make the right decisions in their business. And by partnering with the experts out there like these groups you see here today, that's how we can get that done. So just to kind of wrap it up then, you know, we have over 30 years of audit experience. Our goal is to really provide a significant level of customer service and focus to our clients, hopefully demonstrate some cost savings, and really help you to improve risk management throughout your organization. So at this time, Amy, I'm going to pass it back to you, and I thank you everyone for giving me your time today.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. Before we introduce our main speaker of the day, I have another polling question for you all to give your input on, and that has to do with facility recalls. Again, all responses to these polls are anonymous, so feel free to share your thoughts. Have you had a recall at your facility or retail location within the last 5 years? Answers include yes, no, unsure, or maybe if you don't necessarily work in a manufacturing or retail setting, there's an option for you as well. So go ahead and get those votes in, and we will move right along to our next speaker. For those of us who joined a little bit late, again, if you have any questions that come up or want some more clarification on any topics mentioned, you can go ahead and type a question right into the questions tab of the control panel on your screen, and we will respond to as many of those as possible once we reach the end of the slides. All right, and it looks like we've got well over half responding. It looks like most of you have avoided recalls, so congratulations and well done on avoiding recalls. Those are tedious and concerning, but let's get right into introducing our main speaker of the day. So at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jen Crandall, the CEO and founder of Safe Food en Route. Jennifer has a food science degree from Purdue and has 8 years of manufacturing experience with 12 years at Kroger's corporate offices. In 2018, she founded Safe Food en Route. Jennifer and her team are in the food safety consulting space with a focus on the FSMA rules, aka the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSVP, and supplier compliance management. In today's presentation, Jen will be sharing with you information about supply chain management from the food safety perspective. All right, and I will hand things right over to Jen, and Jen, you can take it away whenever you're ready.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much. And as Amy mentioned, my background, a lot of the time that I was in my career before I founded the company, I was working with the Kroger company on a lot of the decisions that might be surrounding food safety and branding decisions. So hopefully this presentation will help answer some of those questions for you. Let me grab the controls here. I thought I had it. There we are. Okay, so a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. We've already done the introduction, so that's already done. Food safety or branding, just trying to give you a mindset of that question. You know, so as we go through all of this, I want you to just kind of think and answer questions as we go. They won't always be polling questions, but I just want you to think about, is it a food safety decision or is it a branding? And then we'll discuss what my response is. And then, of course, we'll be diving into each topic a little bit more in depth. So it seems so obvious, food safety versus branding, and I'm sure you're probably thinking, well, food safety is just a given, isn't it? We're always talking about food, and that should be what the top of mind is. You might be thinking, isn't that part of the branding decisions? It's not even, shouldn't even be part of the branding decision because it's already a requirement. Depending on who's in the audience, if you're in the food safety space or the quality space, you're thinking, duh, that is of course what they're you know, we're always thinking that way. But it's not always the simple, like there's not always a simple line there. Sometimes it feels very gray, especially if you're in the sales or the operations management side of the business, or even on the customer and client side of the business. A lot of times they don't understand that. So, wow, that just jumped ahead on me. So did you know that in 1 in 6 people, so kind of going back to our results of the survey, you saw the recalls, that, yeah, good for you guys that you haven't had very many recalls that have happened, but they do happen every day. And there's 1 in 6 people in the United States get sick from foodborne illnesses every year. And did you realize that the average cost of a recall can be up to $10 million? So avoiding that is avoiding a $10 million cost to your business, which is a good thing to avoid. But the fact that we have 1 in 6 people getting sick indicates that we do still have statistics that show us that sometimes there's a question between food safety and branding decisions. So kind of going back to the next slide, it definitely matters, that decision. So oftentimes the decisions that we are making jeopardize food safety. And anyone that's worked in the production space has been familiar with some of those decisions. And sometimes we forget during that daily grind that we're working on that production and the output of the production is not the main point, as it is the main point when you're in a business to make money, but it also is not the main point whenever you're producing bad quality product or a product that could cause an illness down the road. So it's still very important that that is part of the decision. So what is the typical lean operation? Let's just talk about that, because most large food companies have several people assigned to each role of the roles that might be involved with a product approval process. So you might see different people that are designated to these buckets of sales, brand management, buyer, quality, regulatory compliance, legal team, customs broker, and logistics teams. But for smaller companies, a lot of times there's some buckets that are not always taken care of, or they're, those multiple people are wearing, or like some of the people in the industry are wearing multiple hats. I apologize. And so they might be bucketing these on the responsibility of someone else that is carrying all of these other hats as well. You might see it on the quality assurance and regulatory space. You might also see where somebody is doing like sales and brand management. In a small company, those areas might be outsourced, or sometimes they might not even be part of the organization yet if they are still a growing company. We all know, if you're familiar with the requirements in the FSMA requirements and the laws, there are now new requirements that require us to have people in the quality assurance and regulatory space, but that doesn't mean that everybody is doing that just yet. So kind of coming back to our topic of that food safety or branding decision, you're looking at questions that are related to, is there an immediate threat to health? The FDA came up with a term in the FSMA regulations to help us understand food safety decisions. If you've been trained in FSMA in like preventive controls or possibly foreign supplier verification, you've heard the term Sakota hazard. And Sakota hazard, when we say it, everybody's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's an acronym. When there is a reasonable probability that exposure to the identified hazard will result in, and this is the acronym, serious adverse health consequences or death to humans or animals. So when there is an immediate threat that's associated with the product or with the outcome of the decision that you're making, there is no question this is a food safety choice, right? So is following the regulatory requirements a food safety related question or a branding decision? Regulations give us a lot of great guidance to protect the consumer. They absolutely are regulatory minded, are food safety driven. The requirements are in place to ensure that the product is compliant with the regulations and standards, which are typically backed by historical and scientific evidence. The audits that are conducted by the regulatory agents have that solely in mind, but a facility should usually try to aim not just to pass those audits. It should be a minimum standard, and food safety should be part of the everyday culture. HACCP and FSMA. So, and what I meant to put on this slide was more like preventive control. So HACCP and a food safety plan, if you were developing that, is that food safety or branding? I know these sound obvious, and to a qualified individual, they're probably thinking this is the most boring presentation. If you said food safety on these, of course you're right. HACCP, hazard analysis of critical control points, is a systematic way to manage the hazards and associate hazards associated with the food that is being produced. It's a fundamental requirement already of the USDA and has been part of their program since 1996 because it falls into that regulatory requirement. For facilities that don't fall under USDA jurisdiction, the FSMA requirements now in effect are to help manage those. And so they have adopted somewhat of a more HACCP-based principle. Food safety plans are a lot more intense than a HACCP plan. There's very distinct differences, and I would recommend going through training if you need to understand those better. But those are based on proactive decisions to prevent hazards from getting out into the consumer. They have a lot of programs that support them that are in place, such as the good manufacturing practices, supply chain, allergens, foreign materials. So it's very similar to the prerequisite programs for HACCP that are required for food safety plans. Again, I definitely suggest if you've not gone through that type of training before and you need to get more in depth, this is a requirement in the FDA space as your company gets to certain sizes. So those are some of the food safety decisions that are there whenever it's regulatory or is it causing a potential threat, that SECODA hazard that we discussed. The next type of questions, I think we have a polling question next, so I'll give it back to Amy to ask that.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks. Just a quick one to throw at you guys here. And that is getting certified with a GFSI benchmarked audit scheme, such as BRC, a branding decision or a food safety decision, in your opinion? Food safety, branding decision, both, or maybe you're unsure. Like I said before, all responses are anonymous in the poll, so tell us what you think. And we've had some more people come in since the last time I mentioned it, but please go ahead and drop any questions you might have. If there's any points you want some clarification on, or if you have your own example that you'd like input on, go ahead and drop those right into the questions tab and we will respond to those as soon as we get to the end of the slides. All right, it looks like we've got some good responses going on in this poll. Looks like a nice mix of either food safety or both. So
Yeah.
right back to you there, John.
Okay, great. Well, I was very curious how you might respond to this because there is very mixed responses to whether a GFSI audit scheme is considered a food safety decision. And I'm glad to see that many of you said both because I would say that actually is the right response. The food safety audit schemes that are put together by those are globally benchmarked, as you know, and as Paul mentioned as well. These are globally recognized audit schemes that have food safety at the core. So they absolutely are a food safety decision. However, you know, there was some polling question variance, which demonstrates that there is some confusion on whether it's solely food safety or branding. Technically, becoming certified with one of these audit schemes would be a branding decision ultimately, not a food safety question. The audit schemes and all of the guidances that are in there are really meant to help you have a robust, mature program that will support producing safe food, which ultimately is important for your brand. But from a branding perspective, it makes your company marketable. So when you are in the, you know, in the selling position of the company, if you are one of the salespeople and you are trying to get in front of some of those larger retailers, the larger retailers and the larger food service distribution companies require this. This is a minimum requirement to do business with them. And regulatory compliance and food safety are at the core of these programs. So that's why it teeters on both. And as I mentioned, you know, they are recognized standards that have components that are defined by global experts that fall into all of the different expertise areas of the food industry, including food safety, the retail organizations, educational organizations, and auditing firms. So they have all had input into making this a good benchmark for those retailers and those the food service distribution companies to ask you for these requirements to be met. It helps them be assured that you have done the right things, but should be broadcasted everywhere as a brand identity that, hey, we passed this audit scheme. We, put it on your website, make sure you're putting it on your pamphlets, your brochures, that sort of thing. It is definitely a branding decision. But it is not the only option. So if you're in a position that you're not quite mature enough, or you're still learning and still growing as a company, many of those large retailers and large food service companies require the GFSI in their private label programs, but it's not always the only way to go. They might not require that if you are selling your own brand to those companies. So there are many ways to have food safety and quality programs in place that would support managing that, the hazards of that food. You can manage your program, through any of these above listed. The Global Markets Program, which is a stepping stone to getting to a GFSI audit scheme. You can have GMP audits, which is good manufacturing practice. ISO audits. Industry associations have some great programs that help you do some lab testing and keep you in tune with their audit schemes. And then, of course, there's customer audits, which are second party, and then third party audits, which might be just, a third party consulting company coming in and doing an audit. And of course, you can do your internal audit programs as well. There's too much liability at stake, though, and at risk in this industry to not have some type of program in place. And I just want to reiterate to think back on those stats earlier, that 1 in 6 people get sick every year in the United States. One thing I didn't mention that it may sound small right now, but about 3,000 people die annually from foodborne related illnesses. In the I'm speaking just US statistics, so if you're outside of the country, then please understand that I'm just using the CDC, the Centers of Disease Control statistics, but 3,000 people might seem like a small amount, but that is basically a 9/11 event happening every year for just sitting down at your table and eating. And then again, the average recall can cost up to $10 million. So not having a program in this place is actively basically saying, my brand is not important enough to have a food safety program. And that is, I'm sure, not the case. Most people will want to have some type of program in place. So what types of things help you with your branding decisions? So we've talked a lot about food safety and HACCP and FSMA, and the regulatory requirements, but what are the other types of programs that might be branding that get a little bit fuzzy and gray? So let's talk about what you stand for and who your target audience is. These are questions, and I just want to do a quick disclaimer. I don't have a marketing background. I worked in private label for 20 years. 12 of that at Kroger, as I mentioned, and 8 of it being on the manufacturing side of it. Now I'm consulting to companies that sell private label products. What I noticed that comes up in these conversations that we have around food safety choices and other decisions, a lot of times organic and kosher and natural and gluten-free and all of those types of questions start popping up, and there's this confusion about how to manage that, whether it's a food safety problem or not. And so it's just very interesting to skirt this line. To me, as a food safety expert, I draw the line on the regulatory requirements and protecting the consumer of the product. So that's where my mind is. So let's go into this. When you get the copy of the presentation, you will get this video. We're not going to play it for you now, but I want to encourage you to watch this video. And it is Simon Sinek, and it is a TED Talk that he did. Oops, it actually started. You're probably not going to be able to hear it. Simon Sinek talks about, like, what is your why? What do you stand for? Yep, I was getting ready to do the same thing. So what do you stand for? Do you want to help the environment? Do you want to help social injustices? Do you care about your people? Do you just want to sell a great product that you care about? Do you want to make money, which is okay? Why do you do what you do? And what you'll hear a quote that's in that video whenever you listen to it, that says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So I'm going to challenge you to think about, who is your target audience? Because in my opinion, your why will help you know who your target audience is. And until you know who that is, you do not know what your brand is. And that comes into play with leadership commitment. And this is a slide, if you attended the webinar that I did in April regarding food safety certifications, GFSI, and leadership commitment, we talked about these elements that the Global Food Safety Initiative, the GFSI standards, require for leaders to demonstrate throughout their teams. These 6 components go across the board for branding decisions just the same. So food safety culture, vision and mission, people, consistency, adaptability, hazard and risk analysis or awareness. You're looking at these 6 components. You can look at them in any form or fashion. Food safety culture is, again, that's the topic of today. That's the theme. But what is the vision and mission of the company? Does it support that food safety culture? Do people support that culture, the people that you have? Do the consistency of their programs and the adaptability and flexibility of things pop up, is that part of the program? So let's go in real quick to who is your target audience. Again, I come back to that. Are they grocery store chain customers? Do you want to sell your product to one of the larger retailers and let them sell your product for you? Or do you want to differentiate yourself and make yourself have a specific category of food? So maybe you want to have organic products only. Are your products inherently or intentionally kosher? There's a difference. If you want to sell to the kosher community, the community that purchases kosher, or maybe you want to sell to the halal communities, those are branding decisions, but you have to know and intentionally want to drive to it. It might be by accident that your ingredients fall into the buckets to be able to do that, but if you're not actively seeking those types of certifications, then you might not have that in place. But these are branding decisions. Get clear on who your audience is, and then you will know your branding decisions. These are all branding choices, examples of them. They might require a lot of paperwork. The thing I want you to keep in mind is that they are putting they're putting somebody in the quality assurance role in charge of this. So that's why the waters get a little bit muddy, because that person is responsible for everything that is related to paperwork. And it appears like these might be food safety choices, but they're not. They are branding choices. If something is going to keep you from getting kosher, like say you accidentally purchased an ingredient that now is causing your formula to not be kosher anymore, that is a branding choice. That is a choice that, okay, now we have to change our label so that it's not reflecting the kosher symbol anymore. That's affecting your brand. That may not be, it might be, but it may not be affecting your food safety. So I know that might be a little bit confusing, and it's probably a little generic compared to what you might need if you have specific questions around this. But I just want to kind of pop that in. So I think there's one other slide. I just want to put this up there. Quality is never an accident. The branding choices, the food safety, none of that is an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, and skillful execution. It represents the wise choice of many alternatives. I've had this quote from William A. Foster on my desk since I started my career, and it was just said to me at one point, and I've just kept it on board ever since. And it helps me make my decisions more clear. So always safe food. Without safe food, there is no brand, right? So it's always a choice of, if it's safe, then it's going to help our brand. If it's not safe, it's definitely not, because you could be one of those companies that are causing 1 in 6 people to get sick. So I think at this point, I want to thank you for your attention. I know we have one more polling question that Amy's going to pull in.
Yep, we have one more polling question, and this is a quick one. Just has to do with what possible topics everyone might like to see in a future webinar. You can choose as many or as few of these as you'd like, so just choose whatever topics you have the most interest in. And Paul, did you want to say anything about our upcoming webinars while everyone responds to this poll?
Sure. Yeah, we have several webinars that are coming up in the next few weeks that are going to be quite exciting. Just to give you an overview, next week we have a meeting with the GRMA, which is the Global Retailers Manufacturers Alliance. I'm going to be discussing with their executive director the process for managing customer complaints and how to do that effectively. The week after that, for everybody that is going for SQF certification, they have a new standard being launched at the conference in a couple of weeks. And we have Leanne Chuboff, who's the Senior VP of Technical Affairs, and she's going to be giving us an update on everything we need to know about the new standard. And then I have the pleasure of welcoming another panel style session with Lisa Palmer, who's the Chief Information Officer at Splunk, as well as Gregory and Cheryl from Teradata. We're going to be talking about supply chain and data resiliency, which I think is quite important. But that's it. I mean, we've got a different webinar coming up every week between now and the end of December. They're all complimentary, so take a look and we hope to see you soon.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much, Paul. And just like those webinars, as I mentioned at the beginning, the slides for this presentation, so if you wanted to check out that video that Jen had mentioned on her slide, you can download the slides and access that video from our website at pjrfsi.com. You can also find a link to our YouTube channel where the recording of this presentation will be uploaded, and feel free to share that around with anyone you think might find it interesting. But now I want to get to some questions, so go ahead, if you had any questions, drop them into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar control panel. And just to get us started, we've got a question here from Jason. Jason has a question about recalls and consumer confidence. He says, do you have any tips for companies in the same industry as a major recall in terms of regaining consumer confidence?
Ooh, that's a really good question. From my perspective, it's just being transparent with your customers and making sure that they understand that, you know, you're staying on top of it, that you are paying attention to the activities that are going on. In fact, you might be even more proactive and share with them what you're learning. So I find that in my space, it helps me whenever I'm telling my customers actively, like, this is happening, this is what we're doing to prevent it from occurring and causing any concerns with you. We're staying very in tune with it. And, you know, just using the produce industry as a good example, the produce industry, whenever they were removing things off the shelf, it was insanity how much was pulled off the shelf during like the spinach recall. That was, I mean, like, we lost all of spinach, or whenever we've done any of the leafy greens. And communication and traceability are such a important factor in that. So I would suggest, communicating as best you can to you want to not be too in depth. Obviously, you don't want to create unnecessary fear with your clients, or give them too much information that they might hold against you later. But you definitely want to share with them, like, we are very familiar with our supply chain. We totally understand where the risks are. We are actively testing and making sure that there are no concerns in our product. So to me, it's that confidence and that proactive approach that really makes a big difference.
All right, great. I have a question here from Jeff. Jeff is wondering, is there anything that he can do to test brand perception when developing brand aspects?
Hmm. That you can do, there's panels that you can do. So companies like Kroger and Walmart, they do sensory panels, but their branding departments also go in and do kind of a similar fashion where they might do a sit down and get a perception based panel, or what do they call it? Um, oh my goodness, like just a focus group. So you could, there's companies out there that do focus group work and you can gather data. So you basically would work with that company that conducts them. And if that's something that you need, I'm sure that Perry Johnson has some connections, but I do as well, that conduct focus groups regularly and help people navigate through the questions that are typically asked.
Yeah, I know, Jen, from a personal standpoint, as a person with a marketing background, the whole branding side of this presentation is super interesting to me as well. Um, just for everyone out there, if there are any questions that, you're not so sure you want to share on the live broadcast, please feel free to reach out to either us at PJRFSI or Jen directly. Contact info is on the screen if you have any specific situational questions or more sensitive questions. It looks like we've got one more question here, unless anyone submits a new one. We've got a question here from Alyssa. Alyssa says, if we aren't ready for a more stringent standard like SQF, are there any less rigorous options that might help with food safety and brand image?
Mhm. I know Paul will have some comment on this as well, but there are schemes out there, like I mentioned, the Global Markets Program, and I believe that BRC has a method, like an in-between audit. So it's helping you move up into the BRC or the SQF schemes. And I'm not sure, I'm not as familiar with the names of those because typically I'm doing a full gap analysis with my group, and can, we're helping them get to the highest level of scheme they can get. But I know, like, Global Markets Program, and Paul, please correct me because I can't remember what the BRC one is, but there is
Yeah.
one that's designated.
Yeah, there is. I mean, and there's a lot of other ones as well. I mean, you can do, a standard HACCP audit, which is your hazard analysis and critical control. You can do GMP for good manufacturing practices, GDP for distribution or packaging. If you're in the cannabis or hemp space, we have many standards for the retailers, growers, and producers as well. A lot of companies are doing their own audit program as well, especially for sites that will never get to a GFSI level. They have what I referred to earlier as a first party audit. That's where it's their own audit checklist. You see this a lot with food safety, quality, social responsibility. So there's many options that you have to enhance the branding of your organization. And I know myself or Jennifer would be happy to discuss that with anybody. So feel free to give us a call at any time.
Yeah, if you download the presentation, slide 16 covers a few of those that Paul mentioned. I just did it real high level on those. I was thinking I was going straight to the GFSI schemes, but I did list several of those as well for your reference if you wanted to look at it again in writing.
All right, perfect. It looks like that was the last question that was submitted in the box. So any parting words of wisdom or thoughts on the current world situation from either of our speakers today?
Current world situation. My goodness, do we have?
That's a loaded question.
No, just thank you everybody on behalf of our company and Jen. We really appreciate your time, and certainly look forward to supporting you in the future. So thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the time as well, and I appreciate the attention of the audience and the great questions. Yes, feel free to connect with me if you have further questions about, again, my disclaimer, I'm not a marketing or a branding person, but I do understand that line that is gated with the decisions. And I'm very familiarized with the private label space if you need assistance.
Great. Thanks so much, Jen and Paul. Thanks everybody who signed on for the call today. And again, if you need the slides or a recording to share with anyone who was unable to attend, go ahead and visit PJRFSI.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for maybe an upcoming training course or another webinar that's coming up down the road. And we'll hopefully see you on another call. And stay safe, stay happy, and stay healthy out there, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.